Imagine you are standing in a garden at midnight. The air is cool, torches are flickering in the distance, and walking toward you through the olive trees is a man you have known for 3 years. A man who sat beside you at dinner just hours ago. A man who broke bread with you, laughed with you, prayed with you. And he is walking toward you now, not to embrace you, but to hand you over to the people who want you dead. That man's name is Judas Iscariot. And here is the question that has haunted scholars, theologians, and ordinary believers for 2,000 years. A question most people have never actually stopped to ask. What if Judas didn't betray Jesus because he was greedy? What if he betrayed Jesus because he believed in him more than almost anyone else? Most people have a very simple picture of Judas. He is the villain, the traitor, the one with the bag of silver coins and the hollow eyes. Sunday school painted him clearly. He sold Jesus out for money, he kissed him in a garden, and then he felt so guilty he took his own life. That is the version almost everyone carries. But here is where most people misunderstand this completely. That version, the simple, clean version, leaves out the most disturbing and most human details buried inside the actual text. Details that, when you slow down and look at them carefully, begin to tell a completely different story. Not a story about a greedy man, a story about a broken man, a man with a plan, a man who may have walked into that garden believing with his whole heart that he was doing the right thing. And that changes everything. To understand Judas, you have to understand the world he was born into. First century Israel was not a peaceful place. It was an occupied nation. Rome controlled everything: the roads, the taxes, the courts, the religious calendar. Roman soldiers stood at the gates of Jerusalem. The Jewish people were not free in their own land, and for generations they had been waiting for someone to come and change that. They had a word for that someone: Messiah, in Hebrew Mashiach. It meant the anointed one. But in the popular imagination of first century Israel, the Messiah was not primarily a spiritual figure. He was a political and military king, a new David, someone who would ride into Jerusalem, raise an army, overthrow Rome, and restore the throne of Israel. That was the expectation. That was the dream baked into the culture. Now, into this world, into this specific expectation, walks a man from Galilee performing miracles, commanding crowds, speaking with authority, and calling 12 men to follow him. And one of those 12 men is Judas Iscariot. His last name, Iscariot, is itself a mystery. Some scholars believe it comes from the Hebrew Ishkarioth, meaning man from Kirioth, a town in southern Judea. Others believe it is a form of the word Sicarii, the name of a radical Jewish resistance group known for assassinating Roman collaborators. If that second reading is correct, Judas may have come from a background of fierce political resistance. He may have been a revolutionary from the very beginning. He was also, the Gospel of John tells us, the treasurer of the group. The disciples trusted him with the money. He was not a minor figure. He was not on the edges. He was inside the circle, close, trusted, chosen. Jesus chose him, not by accident, not by mistake. That is the part that stops you cold. Here is the question I want you to hold in your mind for the rest of this video. There is one idea buried in the original language, in the cultural context, and in the specific details of what Judas does after the betrayal that may completely reframe everything you think you know about this man. It is an idea that does not let Judas off the hook, but it does force you to look at him differently, to see him not as a cartoon villain, but as a human being making a catastrophic mistake for reasons that are shockingly understandable. We are going to get to that idea, but first, we need to walk through the story carefully, because the details matter, and most people have skipped over the details their entire lives. Let's start at a place most people don't begin when they talk about Judas. Let's start with what he witnessed. For 3 years, Judas watched Jesus heal the blind, raise the dead, feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread, walk on water, and command storms into silence. He was there for all of it. He didn't hear about it secondhand. He was in the room. He was in the boat. He was standing there when Lazarus walked out of a tomb 4 days after he died. If you believe what the Gospels say, Judas had front row access to the most extraordinary display of power the world had ever seen. So this is the first thing you have to wrestle with. Judas did not betray Jesus because he didn't believe in him. Something far more complicated was happening inside this man. But here is where it changes. Somewhere along the 3 years, the Gospel of John gives us a small but devastating glimpse. It's tucked into the story of Mary of Bethany anointing Jesus' feet with expensive perfume. Judas objects. He says, and this is almost word for word, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" And John adds a note, a quiet editorial comment. He says, Judas said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He had the money bag, and he used to take what was put in it. This is the only place in all 4 Gospels where we are told something private and damning about Judas's inner life. And most people read that passage and think, there it is. He was greedy. Case closed. But I want you to notice something. John wrote his Gospel decades after the events occurred. He was writing with hindsight. He knew how the story ended. And when people write with hindsight about a betrayer, they see the warning signs everywhere. That is human nature. The real question is, was greed the root cause? Or was it a symptom of something deeper that was already breaking inside Judas? Because here is the part most people miss entirely. 30 pieces of silver, the amount Judas received for handing Jesus over, was not a lot of money. In the ancient world, it was the standard price for a slave. Exodus 21 says that if your ox gores a servant, you owe their master 30 shekels of silver. That is the price, the lowest possible compensation for a human life. If Judas was purely motivated by greed, if this was a financial transaction, he negotiated terribly. He had 3 years of intimate access to Jesus. He knew where Jesus slept, what he ate, what he feared, what he hoped. If this was about money, he could have made a far better deal. 30 pieces of silver is almost insulting. It barely covers a month's wages for a common laborer. So what was really going on? Let's slow down here and look at one word, because this word is where everything starts to crack open. The word is the Greek word paradidomi. In almost every English translation, this word is translated as betray. Judas betrayed Jesus. That is how we read it. That is how we say it. Betray implies malice, deceit, evil intent. But paradidomi does not actually mean betray. It means to hand over, to deliver, to transfer from one place to another. And here is what is so staggering about this. The same word, paradidomi, is used all over the New Testament in completely different contexts. Paul uses it to describe how God handed over Jesus for our sake. Jesus uses it to describe how he gives himself over for the world. It is the same word, used in holy and redemptive contexts throughout the entire New Testament. The translators chose the word betray specifically for Judas. And that choice, that single word choice, has shaped how 2,000 years of Christians have understood this man. What if the original word is telling us something more complicated? What if Judas wasn't simply a traitor, but someone who handed Jesus over with a specific purpose in mind? What purpose? Stay with me. Now here is a pattern hidden inside this story that almost no one talks about. Look at the sequence of events in the final week of Jesus' life, and pay attention to what Judas is watching. Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey, and the crowds go absolutely wild. People are throwing coats on the ground, waving palm branches, shouting Hosanna, which means save us now. This is a royal, political greeting. The crowd is treating Jesus like a conquering king arriving at his capital. Judas is there. He is watching this. Then Jesus walks into the temple, the most sacred building in all of Israel, and he flips tables. He drives out the merchants and money changers. He takes control of the temple. This was a bold, provocative, almost militaristic act of authority. Judas is there. He is watching this. Then the Pharisees and chief priests begin openly plotting to kill Jesus. Tension is building. The city is on edge. The disciples are nervous. And Jesus keeps teaching calmly, clearly, with total authority. Now here is the pattern. Every single one of these events would have looked to a first-century Jewish observer expecting a political messiah like the beginning of a revolution. The triumphal entry, the cleansing of the temple, the confrontation with the religious establishment. These were the moves of someone about to make a bid for power. And Judas, with all that he had witnessed, with all the miraculous power he had seen Jesus display, may have come to a conclusion. Jesus has the power. Jesus has the crowd. Jesus has the authority. But Jesus keeps hesitating. Jesus keeps talking about dying. Jesus keeps saying things like, "My kingdom is not of this world." What if Judas decided, "I am going to force his hand"? This is the theory held seriously by a number of biblical scholars, and it is the most disturbing and most human explanation of all. Judas may not have sold Jesus to get rid of him. Judas may have handed Jesus over because he believed that once Jesus was truly cornered, once the soldiers came and the arrest was made and the moment of crisis arrived, Jesus would finally reveal his full power. He would call down the armies of heaven that he had spoken about. He would overthrow Rome in a single moment. He would reveal himself as the military Messiah that Judas had been waiting for his whole life. In other words, Judas may have been the man who tried to start the revolution himself. And now here is the irony, the gut-punch irony that changes your entire view of this scene. In the Garden of Gethsemane, in the moment of the arrest, one of the disciples draws a sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. The Gospel of John tells us that disciple was Peter. He was ready to fight. He expected a battle, but Jesus stops him. Jesus says, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" And then, immediately, Jesus heals the servant's ear. In the middle of his own arrest, Jesus heals the man who came to arrest him. That is the moment. That is where Judas's plan, if it was ever a plan, collapsed entirely. Because Jesus would not do what Judas needed him to do. Jesus would not fight. And now look at what happens immediately after, and this is the detail that breaks your heart. Judas does not disappear. He does not vanish with his 30 pieces of silver and start a new life somewhere. He goes back. Matthew 27 tells us that when Judas saw that Jesus was condemned, when it became clear that Jesus was not going to fight, was not going to call down heaven, was going to die, something shattered inside him. The text says he was seized with remorse. He went back to the chief priests and elders and threw the 30 pieces of silver onto the temple floor and said, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." Read that sentence again, slowly. "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." That is not the statement of a man who wanted Jesus dead. That is not the statement of a man who was satisfied with what he had done. That is the statement of a man who realized with complete horror that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The chief priests, cold, unmoved, tell him, "That is your problem, not ours." And Judas leaves, and he dies. Now let's pull back, way back to the very beginning. In Genesis, there is a story that almost exactly mirrors this. Joseph, the favored son of Jacob, is betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, handed over to strangers. His brothers take a goat, dip Joseph's coat in its blood, and bring it to their father as proof that Joseph is dead. One of those brothers is named Judah, in Hebrew Yehudah, the name that in Greek becomes Ioudas, Judas. The brother named Judah, Judas, is the one who first suggests selling Joseph. And the price, 20 pieces of silver. Now jump forward 1,000 years. In the book of Zechariah, a prophet acts out a parable of a worthless shepherd and the people of Israel. When the prophet asks to be paid, they weigh out his wages, 30 pieces of silver. And God tells him to throw it to the potter. So the prophet throws the silver into the house of the Lord, to the potter. Matthew quotes this almost word for word when describing what happens to Judas's 30 pieces of silver. The priests take the money. They cannot put it back in the treasury. It is blood money, and they use it to buy a potter's field. The connection runs through the entire Bible like a thread. The name, the silver, the field, the betrayal of the innocent. It was always pointing somewhere, and it was always pointing to this moment, in this garden, with this man. Here is where I want to stop and talk to you directly, not as a narrator, not as a teacher, because there is something deeply human in Judas's story that we almost never talk about. Judas had a version of Jesus that he needed Jesus to be. He had expectations. He had a plan. He had a picture in his mind of how the story was supposed to go. And when Jesus refused to fit that picture, when reality didn't match the expectation, Judas tried to force it. How many of us have done some version of that? Not with silver and soldiers, but in quieter ways. We have a picture of how God is supposed to act, how healing is supposed to come, how justice is supposed to arrive. And when it doesn't happen the way we expected, when Jesus keeps saying things like, "My kingdom is not of this world," and we desperately need it to be of this world, right now, visibly and powerfully, something inside us starts to pull away. Judas's drift didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly. A small theft here, a quiet disappointment there, a moment where he chose his own plan over surrender, and then another, and then another. By the time he walked into that garden with the soldiers, he may not have even recognized how far he had drifted from the man he once was. That is not a story about a cartoon villain. That is a story about a human being. This isn't just ancient history. This speaks directly into something most of us are quietly navigating right now. There is a version of faith that is really just a hidden transaction. We believe in God because we expect God to perform, to show up the way we need, to rescue us on our timeline, to build the kingdom we imagined. And when he doesn't, when the garden goes quiet and the soldiers still come and Jesus still doesn't call down the armies, we feel betrayed. But here is the terrifying and beautiful thing that Judas missed. Jesus was not failing the mission. Jesus was completing it. The surrender in the garden was not weakness. It was the strategy. The cross was not the end of the revolution. It was the revolution. The kind of kingdom Judas wanted, built on power and force and political victory, would have lasted a generation, maybe two. The kingdom built through surrender and sacrifice. 2,000 years later, we are still talking about it. Judas wanted Jesus to win the way the world wins. Jesus won the way heaven wins. And the gap between those two things, that gap is where Judas broke. The question worth sitting with is this. Is there a gap in your own life between the Jesus you expect and the Jesus who is actually there? And what are you doing with that gap? Are you sitting in it honestly? Or are you, in your own quiet way, trying to force his hand? If this is helping you see the Bible differently, if you are realizing that these are not simple morality tales with clear heroes and clean villains, but the most complex and human story ever told, then I think you'll want to stay with this channel. Because every story in this book has layers beneath it, and most of us were only ever shown the surface. Hit that subscribe button if you want to keep going deeper. Leave a comment below and tell me, what did you think about Judas before this video? And what do you think now? I genuinely want to know. Let me leave you with one final image. The night before the crucifixion at the Last Supper, Jesus does something that almost no one slows down to absorb. He knows. He knows what Judas is about to do. The Gospel of John makes this explicit. Jesus knew from the beginning who would hand him over. He knew at the dinner table. He knew when he broke the bread. He knew when he poured the wine. And yet, according to the Gospel of John, Jesus got up from the table, wrapped a towel around his waist, and one by one he washed his disciples' feet, including the feet of Judas. Jesus washed the feet of the man who would betray him within the hour. He held those feet in his hands. He cleaned them, gently, with the posture of a servant. He did not expose him. He did not condemn him. He simply said, quietly, privately, what you are going to do, do quickly. Not with rage, not with despair, with the calm of a man who understood something Judas never could, that the darkest moment in the story was not a mistake. It was the hinge on which all of history would turn. There is a word in Greek, kairos, that means not ordinary chronological time but the appointed moment, the perfect moment, the moment that was always meant to happen. What Judas set in motion in that garden was not outside of the plan. It was the plan, not Judas's plan, but the one written before the foundations of the world were laid. And that is perhaps the most extraordinary thing of all, that even in betrayal, even in human failure and broken expectation and catastrophic miscalculation, even there, the story did not go off the rails. It went exactly where it was always going. Judas thought he was forcing the hand of Jesus, but you cannot force the hand of the one who holds time itself. He didn't derail the resurrection. He delivered Jesus to it. That is not a story about a villain. That is a story about grace so wide and so deep that it swallows even betrayal and turns it into salvation. I'll see you in the next one.